Hi everyone, thanks for joining us today for the second part of our watercolor painting class. Here's the painting that we were working on last time. Everything has dried, so you can see how pretty those watercolor pigments blend into each other. And we're gonna just start leaping right in to flood the rest of this. So we're gonna start here with this edge, this hill in the background, and we'll do the tree and the trunk. And hopefully by then the paint will have dried enough that we can even add some little details. Little details, if we don't get to them, we'll just do on a third section. So I've got my watercolors here, my awesome watercolor set that I just somehow managed to get stuck. Last time we used our greens. We're going to continue to do that, the gray down here. And then we may mix in a little of these browns that are in through this part of the palette for tree trunks and things like that. So let's get started. I'm going to, with my water here and my nice paintbrush, go ahead and flood this section of the watercolor paper here with just plain old straight water, just like we did last time. And if you remember, we're going to go up to the edge of our pencil lines, but we're not going to go over them. That way we're controlling again where the paint is going. So you see I got a couple little splotches here on the canvas, and as we paint they're actually going to disappear. Watercolor paint is super duper forgiving like that. If you can get it while it's wet or just kind of leave it to sit, you'll be able to get the paint off of it or paint over it easily, and you don't need to stress too much about it. I think my favorite part about watercolor painting is that you're really kind of just wanting to paint an idea of something. You know, if you can lose yourself from the thought that this has to be perfect and really start going into the fact that you're maybe capturing a moment of color or a quick image of something that you see. It may not be the quickest painting. I mean, if I'm doing a complex watercolor, it takes me a couple of hours, but it's still going to be so much quicker than like an acrylic paint, and definitely an oil paint, because oil paint has to cure, and oil paint, believe it or not, is not completely cured for somewhere close to a year. All right, so this is our darker tree. So when we make our colors, I'm going to start with that base green that we used before, which is this one. I'm gonna get it nice and wet. And I'm gonna put that wet paint, that wash, into my palette over here. And I think that this is why I really like having like the brick pigments, is because you really are not wasting any paint. You can use the tube of watercolor paint, but I feel like you don't have as much control over how much you're squeezing out and how much you use, and that's not perfect for me, so I don't like it. And this is a green right here, and so I'm gonna go ahead and use a bit of that green. So it's gonna make it a little bit darker. Put that in my palette over here. And let those colors mix themselves together a little bit, and then we're gonna put them on our wet paper, just like we did before. All right, here we go. Okay. I like to start at the bottom. I don't really know exactly why. I think I just like the way that I can see if I put it around the edges and I watch the way that the pigment disperses throughout the water, then I have a really good idea of where I want to go ahead and throw more pigment later. So this one, because it's a foreground image, I'm actually going to make the inner part of my hill dark rather than the upper part like I was doing in the background. So I'm gonna move this paint around a little bit, just so it kind of goes where I want it to. You can do that just kind of by tapping, if you can see what I'm doing here. Just tapping my brush where I want the paint to go, kind of. And then the water will take it the rest of the way, which is my favorite part of watercolor painting. Now, because we do want the inner part of the tree to be a little bit darker, and that actually is going to kind of give it like a note of it being shadowed, I'm going to use some more of that gray that we used last time and make some of that and then add that to the wash that we already have. So here we go. I'm going to add that into my wash. Boop, 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 boop. Please ignore me. I have always sung while painting. Oh, I just realized you can't quite see that as well as I'd hoped. There we go. And you can do this if you have a palette kind of like mine. I've got these trays here on my palette, and you can mix within them. You see I've dotted different things so I can see what colors they were on the white. But you do not have to. And if you're like me and you don't want to get your set super duper messy, having one of these little paint mixer situations is super helpful. All right, here we go. And so see, that's a very slightly darker color than the rest. And by putting that in there, we're gonna give it the idea of shadows and textures within the hill here. It's kind of a cheater way to shade, but I'm all about finding different ways to do things that are easier, that make more sense, and then they create a product that you can be really proud of. I never thought I would be good at watercolors. I really truly didn't until I started looking into doing it this way. And I have been super impressed with the results of the work that I've done with them. So there we go. That is the hill. And much like the last time, and this just happens with the way that your paper might bend, you see how I have these puddles right here? I'm going to use a piece of paper towel. You can even use a tissue works, and soak up the pigment there. And because it's so wet and watery, it's really going to disappear quick. And you don't have to worry too much about having some weird splotch on your hill where there wouldn't be a splotch on your hill if your paper hadn't bent. So I'm going to pull those up, and then I'm going to kind of just use a much drier brush than I normally would for this to push that stuff around a little bit so that you don't see the line and crease from where I used my paper towel to soak up that pigment. We don't want to see that. See, there's a little line there. So if I get the water, so my paintbrush is pretty dry, and just kind of move it around. Bring. Then you're gonna not have that area there anymore. And the paper does dry really quickly, so that's nice. What we're going to be doing then is going to be painting the tree, and we're going to want that to be a pretty dark green because we want it to stand out from the greens behind it. So I'll start mixing up